My name is Frank Hui. I'm from Designs by Talon. My husband and I used to sell here a long time ago. And it's nice to be back. This is a panel that I created about 4 years ago, and I always keep updating it because it keeps adding to itself as life. And basically, it's a historical representation of LGBTQ in the genre of superheroes. And when I say that, let me get this because I like to stand a little. What I mean by that, I'd like to stick to a very narrow, classic definition of a superhero. You know, brightly colored costumes, masks, fighting villains, that sort of thing. And I do that because one, even though this is an hour-and-a-half time slot, I would still need an extra hour if I didn't stick to that. And this is meant to be comprehensive, but it's not complete. Yet again, you don't want to be here for 2 to 3 hours. And in keeping with that kind of definition, I'm not going to be most anime doesn't fall under that definition. And I wouldn't be touching things like Korra. I wouldn't be touching characters like John Constantine, Hellblazer, or Kim and Kim, who are trans adventurers. And this is not like, if I don't have those characters, it's not because I don't think they're good enough. It's just, again, I'm trying to keep things tight. And it also could be if I don't mention a favorite character, it's likely because it's not personal. It's not even personal taste, because this is more representational. Or I might just not be aware of that character. Okay, now, I like to usually, when I start this, I'm starting back to 1980. A very personal hell, or otherwise known as Hulk Magazine issue 23. This is a very infamous issue in comic book circles, where basically Bruce Banner, he's living in the slums of New York, in misery, in a tenement, and he almost gets raped in the public showers. And this is one of the earliest uses of gay characters, even as minor. Nobody liked it. He manages to barely talk his way out of it and escape. He even tells these people, I'm really the Hulk. And like I said, it was like a very criticized scene in a very criticized issue. Nobody liked the issue at all. And what's even more interesting is, at no point during this very stressful moment does Bruce Banner turn into the Hulk. And of course, that's his thing. When he gets stressed out, he's gonna suddenly turn into the Hulk. And the thing is, if there is one person who can get away with the gay panic defense, and he doesn't, it's almost like sending the message, well, gays are so terrible and scary, even the Hulk doesn't want to face them. Now, Jim Shooter, who, yes, this is one of probably the lowest point in his career. He's still known for it, even after almost 40 years later. This brings up this whole issue, which, this is gonna be a running theme, which I call Marvel and homophobia. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about how some of the most unfortunate and the most dubious pieces of representation have been associated with Marvel. And they historically have had a rockier road to evolve. And I'm not saying that Marvel is homophobic per se, it's just that there's a couple of spectacular screw-ups. When they drop the ball, boy, do they drop it. But anyway, the key thing here is that Shooter tried to justify what he did by saying, well, this is based on a personal experience that happened to me and a friend of mine. And it's not unusual for writers, creators to like channel trauma of a horrible event by putting it into art. And I don't want to trivialize or dismiss that trauma, because he never went into detail, like to what extent. But this is 1980. less than 7 years earlier, being gay was still on the medical books as a mental illness. And people, the common belief that if you're gay, you're not safe to be around children was still at its peak. Or if you're queer or you're just different. So, you know, I don't want to say, okay, you want to channel your anger and your pain, that's fine, but something like this does more harm to us than help to you. And there are other straight writers who said, are you out of your mind? Now, the good news is it only gets better from here. So we hit the 80s. Now, like I said, sometimes you can see some good things. Marvel isn't, you know, Marvel is not inherently a homophobic place, and this is proof of it. And there's a character called Arnie Roth who was introduced in 1982. He was a childhood friend of Steve Rogers, the man who would become Captain America. And they meet up again in the 80s when Arnie's middle-aged and Cap is still young and virile. But he comes to Steve Rogers for help to find his roommate of 10 years, who's also a ballet dancer. And what's great about Arnie is that he's actually a decent guy. He seems to be very sympathetic. He would have made a great supporting, long-term supporting character, but once he only stayed for this like 10, 20 issue story arc, which involved him being a terrible pawn of a master villain of Cap's, and it's just too bizarre to get into it. I will say is that with Arnie, they actually touched upon the idea that just maybe Steve Rogers isn't as straight-laced and straight as he might be. They kind of threw that out there, which was pretty daring. But what's the most interesting thing, of course, is that Arnie is clearly, and even if you read these issues, you can see he's a direct influence for the Bucky-Steve Rogers relationship in the movies. Because Bucky is clearly based on Arnie. And so, he's a great character. And it is a shame that he you know, eventually they brought him back a few years later and he had cancer, and Steve says goodbye to his friend and has some closure. But as we move on over to DC, they introduced a couple of villains known as Cannon and Sabre. And these two guys are a bunch of fun-loving mercenaries who in their spare time, they like to give each other massages in their underwear while drinking champagne. And yes, there are actually pictures of that out there that were unofficial. So, now going back to Marvel, okay, can I kind of assume most of you are under 30? All right, this is why I need an hour and a half, because I have to give backstory. I'm 53. I read these issues when they came out. Cloud is a very interesting character, and you know, at the time, writing queer characters openly was pretty much impossible, and it was very restricted. You couldn't even say at that time gay. You know, you were lucky to say the word gay. You couldn't clearly, unquestionably identify the characters. But like a lot of filmmakers from the 30s and 40s, you can actually come up with some pretty interesting stories when you get those constraints. And Cloud is a very good example of that. And she, or they, were a very early example of gender fluidity. And basically what happens is, you can see from her, she's got these wisps of Cloud strategically covering her body. She's got weather powers. She joins this group called the Defenders. One of the teammates on there is a telepath named Moondragon, who at the time was the queen of the bees. That's the nice way of putting it. And for some reason, God only knows why, Cloud develops an affection and tells Moondragon, and being 1984, that freaks Moondragon out. Doesn't want to deal with it. And near the end of that issue, she's in her bedroom. Suddenly a big cloud of smoke appears, and Cloud appears, only Cloud's now a very handsome young Twinkie blonde boy who's saying, "It's okay now, it's okay." Imagine waiting 30 days back then to say, what the hell is going on here? Well, turns out, Cloud is actually an asexual alien from Nebula from another galaxy. And when Cloud came to the Earth to visit, they had this weird encounter with this young couple that were in a car accident and ended up in a coma, and as a result, Cloud became amnesiac, absorbed their mental identities and mimicked their bodies, and that's how we got to where we were at. And that's how Cloud was able to, in their mind, flip-flop between gender identities. And later on, Moondragon, years later, would start developing an interest in it. So, we go to 1986. Anyone who does not know about Watchmen? Do I need to explain the significance? So, the most important thing is, broke ground. Time magazine called it listed it amongst the 100 greatest pieces of literature in the 20th century. So, but as you can see, when you get more sophisticated fare like that, you can get away with more stuff. And some things that you can also get away with, if you're a really popular creator, and during the 80s, there was nobody more popular than Chris Claremont, because he was writing X-Men and New Mutants. And of course, one of the things about Chris Claremont is that his books have often been embraced by minorities as that symbol of oppression, and probably queer minorities, sexual minorities are probably closest to them. Just the way they talk and the dialogue and so forth. And this one, there was a situation where we got as good as a metaphor as possible, is where Larry Bodine was a mutant in the closet, and he got found out, and he killed himself. And Kitty Pryde, one of the X-Men, came across this, what his life was like, and so she ended up giving his eulogy. This is a direct quote of the eulogy. And Chris Claremont was such a big deal and so important, he could get away with explicit language like this to drive a point about the harassment. And this is 1980, this is over 30 years ago. My things have not changed. So, but that shows the power of allies. And that can help that's how they were able to help our community. Now, a very interesting thing happened when we get to 1988 over at DC. There was a lot of interesting little things. They had their first gay superhero known as Extrano. See, Extrano, what does that translate into? A guy with magical powers. Well, anyway, he was created by Steve Englehart, who was a creator of great respect and renown, veteran, been doing around since the 70s. And this was a man who was not afraid to do something controversial. And I always like telling this example. I never get bored of this one. Back in the 70s, he created a story arc, which he had the woman who was going to bear the second coming was a Vietnamese superheroine, former prostitute, who was raised by alien Buddhists. Let that sink in. And you've actually seen this woman in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Actually, a version of her. A less kick-ass version. And that's Mantis. Yes. And she did give birth to this. He was half plant. Long story. Incredible story, epic story. But anyway, going back to there, even though we've got this clearly gay character, and he is fairly powerful and renowned, we have a problem, unfortunately, because it is 1988. And the problem is, back then in the 80s, in terms of culturally, pop culture, in middle America, you can distill gay men to two archetypes. One, self-loathing maniac. Two, swishy clown. He was the latter. He was very feminine. And obviously, today, there's nothing wrong with having an effeminate gay man as a superhero. In fact, we said, yeah, we all deserve our place at the table. But this was 1988. And unfortunately, Steve Englehart, bless his heart, he wasn't the most nuanced character. He was likable, he was decent and heroic, but he was a lot of stereotypes. And it didn't help that he decided to incorporate HIV into the story, because 1980s can get more relevant to gay men than HIV. However, the way Extrano got HIV is by encountering this creature called Hemogoblin. That's right, Hemogoblin. Now, there was a bad reaction, and they knew that they had to overhaul. They had to change the character, and eventually, Steve got driven off the book called Millennium, or Guardians, excuse me. And what happened was, well, instead of pulling back and toning down some of the more extreme elements and trying to give a little more nuance, they went all the way to the other end of the spectrum. So one day in the jungle, he finds a crystal skull far sooner than Indiana Jones does, and he gets transformed where he's shirtless, he's bulging with muscles. Instead of casting spells, he's punching and literally kicking ass. And so he went from Nathan Lane to Tom of Finland. And they didn't quite understand. No. He's still not better. You just made him hyper-masculine instead of hyper-feminine. Now, in fairness to Steve Englehart, later on, he would create a much studlier, better gay character for Malibu Comics called Spectral for the book called The Strangers. And Extrano would appear back in 2016 as a nuanced character who is a magic user and doesn't bother with costumes, but is happily married and willing to help out now and then. Now, around the same time, Maggie Sawyer comes out, and she's been always a very important part of the Superman mythology in the last 30 years. She's been a major character. You've seen a version of her on Supergirl a couple years ago on the TV show. Now, unfortunately, we still have the same problem when she was introduced, because there were two types of lesbians back then. You had those who had a predilection for flannel, and then you had Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct. This is what she looked like. Now they softened, now fortunately, they actually, unlike Extrano, they said, let's just flesh her out, make her a real person, let's give her some problems, but not too melodramatic. And she's been around for a long time. You know, she's a divorcee, she had to fight for custody of her kids, and she even starred in her own miniseries, so hooray! Now, around again that same time, there was another interesting character which I know none of you have heard of because he was only around for less than a year. And that is Tony Mantegna. And what is really great about Tony is when he was introduced, he was, before he became joined the superhero team, or drafted into the superhero team, he used to be an investigative reporter who lost his hearing. And that really hurt his abilities. It's a tough break, but he dealt with it. He kind of went up against kind of like corruption. And sometimes he would win, sometimes he'd lose, but he dealt with it. He had a lover he cared deeply about who died in an accident, not from a hate crime, and he dealt with it. In other words, he just was a real person who had, okay, life's putting me down, but I'm not gonna be a big old drama queen about it. Like, he says, not every gay man is suffering from AIDS. Not every person is gonna necessarily have to like deal with, with the hate. Sometimes, yes, sometimes we have normal tragedy. And it was nice because they made it very explicit that, oh yeah, he's gay. So, going back to what I said earlier about allies, and it was this is especially a really important time in the 80s to have allies. And there was some problem. One of the best ones was a creator called Mike Grell, who's one of the creators most associated with Green Arrow. And back in 1988, he created this two-part story called The Gauntlet, where basically Oliver Queen goes undercover to investigate who a serial killings of gay men. And he's going undercover in gay bars, much like the movie Cruising. And it's, you know, anybody who's seen Arrow and Stephen Amell and Leather, we said, oh, we can accept that. And the nice thing about this is that Green Arrow under Mike Grell is one of those things where social issues, social conflict, social justice was a constant theme. And that was something Mike Grell was very big on. Mike was a straight man, happily married. 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, somebody interviewed, why are you writing a story like this? You must have gotten a lot of grief. And he says, because I need to help people raise awareness. I used to be a dumb, bigoted hick, and I grew, I evolved. And if I can grow and evolve, anybody can, and I feel it's my duty to use my book, my writing skills, to help people grow. What are they gonna do, fire me? I'm too important, they're not gonna do it. And that's a quote. He said, they're not gonna fire me, I'm too important. Now, as we come to the end of the 80s, lo and behold, the Comics Code Authority makes some important changes. One, gay people queer people can be explicitly identified. And we can be exploited with the same consideration as straight people, hooray! And that makes it important things. Like, we can't just be shown as a plot device. We actually have, if we're talking about our sexuality, it has to be relevant. It has to be part of a real story, not just quick character assassinations. And on top of that, I'm about to introduce you a mini-series that brace yourselves for. Have any of you ever read something called Brat Pack? Okay. Brat Pack makes Watchmen look like a bedtime story. No. Yes. Basically, Rick Veitch, the basic premise is, theme is, mass vigilantes have no business mentoring children and are terrible role models. And you basically have 4 vigilantes, each of them, they have sidekicks. And the important thing about the sidekicks is that's where they make all their money from merchandising. And they usually bring in a sidekick from orphanages and who have potential that they can exploit, but not too smart to figure out what's going on and how they're being used. And they're cannon fodder. They know that they're in a high-risk job, and those kids, they might be lucky to last a year, maybe 2. But they know they can get a steady supply to replace them. And in one of these stories is the Midnight Mink and Chippy. And the Midnight Mink is not only a gay man in the closet, sort of, and he actually has superpowers from having slept with their version of Superman. Again, long story. And what happens is, his original Chippy sidekick, he not only exploited, he also had romantic feelings for it. So replacing Chippy each time isn't just a question of, I need a new sidekick to keep the money going. I want to recapture my past original relationship. Yes. Yes, it is. And what he does is, once he kind of figures out that there's a possibility that the kid could be open to a relationship with him, he bribes him with superpowers. And usually the boys, they yield because, well, at least I'm in a rich mansion and I'll get superpowers. It's better than being an orphan. And they usually regret that decision. Simply because they are still being treated as a commodity. So that's the 80s. And we hit the 90s, and we hit some important changes. First of all is 1991, the character of the Pied Piper, a Flash supporting character, comes out. And it was a little throwaway scenes, a couple of pages. In fact, it's almost like no big deal. which what's made it a big deal, because he just kind of says it on the fly. And the Flash at first is a little thrown and a little embarrassed because he was making jokes about the Joker being gay. And eventually they just get past it by the end of the issue and they move on. And this is the first comic book to ever win the GLAAD Award. This is the first time when they had that category, and that's what the big deal is. And speaking of coming out, and not presented as not a big deal, is the character of Northstar, which is Marvel's most I was about to say infamous, I meant most prominent, gay man. He was the first, he came out in 1992. Okay, having read Alpha Flight, knowing this character from the beginning, this did not exactly, anyone from my generation went, oh hooray, Northstar is gay. Northstar was a douchebag back then. He's one of those guys who was a 10 looking for an 11, who had no problem hooking up with a sugar daddy, who had no moral, ethical qualms about using his superpowers to cheat at winning gold medals at the Olympics. Now, he does grow, and he does become a role model, but it's like, really? This is the mutie that you want to give us? You couldn't give us Colossus, who's a decent guy? But anyway, as we move on, we have Marvel Homophobia Part 2. Now, there was during the 80s, Jim Shooter wrote that lovely story about Bruce Banner almost getting raped. Supposedly had this unspoken rule, because at the time he was editor-in-chief, that says, no gay stories, no one gets outed, no explicit things like that. And there was a writer who wanted, and the original guy, the guy who originally created Northstar, the goal was to eventually have him come out and reveal to be gay. And so that got supposedly kiboshed. And another writer wanted to do HIV storyline. And he was much more subtle and realistic. There were all these little signs of Northstar kind of coughing, getting kind of sick, just the little signs. And like I said, Northstar was no Boy Scout in the bedroom. So, and they said, I want to make it realistic. And he got into a big conflict with the powers that be. And so what they did was, he was basically pushed off the story or driven away. And the people who took it over, they changed the HIV story to, oh no, he's not getting AIDS. He's actually transforming into an elf, which is his true nature. And at the end of this issue, on the end of this reveal, he gets whisked away to the heavens by two beautiful fairies. I'm not kidding. Now, he is brought back, and they just pretend that story never happened. And they were lovely female fairies. Now, of course, I've been mainly talking about representation by the two main companies. And every once in a while, someone independent does that. Like, there was a thing called Gay Comics. It was like a quarterly mag. And Andy Mangels and J.A. Fludd, they did create their own gay superhero. He was in some brief stories. He's worth mentioning. It's really hard to find the issues. But it's just worth noting. Now, and we get back to further. Any of you ever read Legion of Superheroes? Okay. They're a super team in the 30th, 31st century, all young, beautiful people, no sexual hang-ups, different alien races. They're basically like a cool elite police force. And they're about equal gender ratio. And what happened was, as one for a situation like that, most of them get paired off. And some of them were non-heteronormative and paired off that way. But there was one character that never, for the longest time, did not get paired off, and that was Jan Era Element Lad. And people always kind of wondered, like, which way does he roll? And what happened was Paul Levitz, who was a very prominent writer associated with the Legion, gave him a girlfriend, Shvaughn Erin, who was basically a space cop, and they had this great romance, great love affair. And there was a point where the new one set of writers, Keith Giffen and the Barenbaums, they did this story arc where the Earth ended up in a big galactic war, and it ruined their economy, and things were really rough. And Giffen really felt that in his heart, Element Lad is non-heteronormative. So he decides to reveal that Shvaughn Erin is transsexual. This is a hard one to kind of identify at the time. And the reason she was Shvaughn is because she was taking these special pills called Profem that allowed her to have a gender change and confirmation of what she felt was her true gender. And so because of what happened with the fallout of the war, there was no more supply of the drug to keep her in that state, and she eventually reverted back to her original biological sex. And she was freaking out. What is he gonna say? What is he gonna say? Now, of course, I'm sorry, usually in the year 3000, this should be a non-issue. But this was written in 1992. And Element Lad, or Stan, eventually says, I don't have a problem. He's the last survivor of a planet of people who can change elements. And transmuters. This is normal to him. There's nothing bizarre to him about someone who is transsexual or trans. But there were some trans people who didn't like the use of, I took a pill and everything's solved. Okay, but speaking of something a little more current, there is this character, Coagula, who appeared in the Doom Patrol. I don't know if there are any plans to feature her in the TV series, but she was an actual transsexual. And there was a time when she was poor and struggling and she was turning tricks. She got superpowers by sleeping with this mutant guy, and so she had these powers literally to liquefy and solidify matter. Like how this gun with his very phallic weapon. And what was interesting was, one, the person who created her during her run herself was a transsexual science fiction writer. What made it even further interesting is that the person who she got the powers from was someone also, she found out eventually, was on the same team, and his character's name was Rebus, and he was a gender hybrid of this character called Radioactive Man, who was played by Mike Baumer on the TV show, and the guy's female doctor. So basically, you have this transsexual who got her powers by sleeping with an intersex person. Yes. 1993, folks. Now, I'm gonna do this is the character Hector. He's a minor character. What was very nice about him, again, this is Marvel showing a very positive character. What was nice about him, he was an ally to the Hulk, he was part of a super team, and the important part of his character was he didn't like getting pushed around. Anytime somebody was making comments or jokes about gay people or sexuality, he pushed back. He wasn't gonna take crap like that. Now, as we move forward, and again, a more sophisticated story, we're gonna talk about Arnold Astrovik, who was the father of the superhero known as Vance Astrovik, known as Justice, also known as Vance Astro, depending on which comic you ever looked at and what era. And Vance was a mutant with psychic powers. But his dad wasn't so crazy about having a son who was a mutant. And he didn't want a mutant for a son. And he says, and he would beat on him and taking the attitude, you're gonna be normal if it kills me. And unfortunately, it does kill. Because in self-defense, Van actually uses his powers to defend himself and inadvertently kills his father. And he's carried that guilt for years. But through the miracle of comic book storytelling, he gets to go back in time 30 years and sees what his dad was like when he was a young man, and he finds out his dad was a closeted homosexual. And his dad's attitude is, "You're gonna be normal if it kills me." And it plays on that whole idea about how abusive people themselves were abused, and they're passing on all that toxic and poisonous behavior. Which is pretty gutsy for Marvel to do back in the 90s. Now, we're gonna go back and talk about Chris Claremont a little bit, and the character of Nightcrawler, who is a pretty well-established character with the X-Men. And they had toyed around like whether he was related to the character of Mystique, who was the shapeshifter that's appeared in pretty much all the X-Men movies. And originally, and it was revealed in '94 that she was his mother. Well, Mystique is bisexual in the comics. And what Chris Claremont originally wanted to do was have Mystique be the father. And she was involved with a woman and saying, you know, all I have to do is I'll just shift into a man, I'll impregnate you, we have a baby together, beautiful. Powers that be said, no, Chris. No, not for you, not even for you. Too controversial, too weird. So there are limits to allyship and fame. Okay, and I want to bring up a couple characters there, Tasmanian Devil and Iceman. They're minor characters. What was kind of interesting, they're from DC, from Justice League International. And what's kind of interesting for them is, they actually both came out. And if you blinked, you missed it. I blinked and I forgot. I had these issues that came out. I literally forgot. It was years later, like, this guy's gay? She's bisexual. Man, I don't remember. You think I would remember? And the writers just kind of threw it out there, and you know, nobody noticed. And except a few people, there was a storyline where the Tasmanian Devil was killed by this demon and turned into a rug. And then there were some hardcore, very, very hardcore fans that said, "You're being homophobic, you're being homophobic." What are you, and the writers said, "What are you talking about? He's gay! What are you talking about? He's not gay." "Yes, he is!" And then they're, oops. And they undid that and pretended it never happened. So he's alive and well. Now, I'm gonna go on to the next about some very famous duo. I assume you guys know who Ace and Gary are? Famous on Saturday Night Live skit, voiced by Stephen Colbert and Steve Carell. Now, the reason I put them on here is the big thing about Ace and Gary is they're not gay. But they are not heteronormative. You don't ever see them kiss. You don't see them have sex. They don't even share the exact same bed. They don't even hold hands. What they are is very comfortable with themselves. And they don't fit into what the definition of a pair of crime-fighting superheroes are supposed to be like. And because they don't, people just assume they're gay. And so the joke isn't that, "Ooh, there those two guys are, they're gay." No, the joke is everybody's being bigoted and assumes. All right, in 1996, I found this like last year. There was actually a video game, a computer game, very basic graphics, where the basic premise is this superhero named Fubar is trying to rescue his boyfriend from these evil supervillains that work for corrupt corporates, like the big pharma and people who make cigarettes. And what's interesting, the best they can like drop into to keep it gay is like life points or like shield points or condoms, and there are little pink triangles, because you can see the style. This is very limited graphics back then. This is like the mid-90s. So they did the best they can to make it as inclusive and a little wink. Now, I'm going to change mediums here. Back in 1997, there was a series of books that were started called the Rainbow Arc of Fire. These were kind of a self-published set of books where you had gay, lesbian superheroes. And they were written by Greg Sanchez, who was a former Air Force pilot that was drummed out because somebody ratted him out as gay. And unfortunately, they're not very good books. Like, it takes about the 4th or 5th book before they kind of gel, or even have the characters have costumes. The intention is very good, so that's why I bring it up. It's one of the earliest, if not the earliest, attempt at novels, superhero novels that are gay characters. But he doesn't quite, you can kind of tell if you read the first few, he doesn't have a firm grasp of what an adventure novel is supposed to be like. There's a lot of politicking and talk, and after a while, like, where are the villains? Where's the fights? Engage me, please. I mean, he eventually gets there, but, you know, you might not want to wait 5 books for it to happen. But he is worth noting. Now, 1997 is the formation of the Gay League. They started out, they got a website, they started out as a Yahoo group, and they're now just primarily on a Facebook group. And they were inspired after, because there's a regular thing in the San Diego Comic-Con called Gays in Comics, and now they're called Queers in Comics, to be more broader and inclusive. But it's been a regular thing, and when they did that, Joe Palmer and a bunch of other guys decided, let's have this group that caters and helps connect LGBT comic book fans. The big thing about this is their website has a great listing of all sorts of gay characters going back to the 1940s. And think about that. There's enough gay characters, LGBT characters, suggestive queer characters in comics in general that it warrants an archive. And there's a hell of a lot more characters now since their inception. Now, we get there, and by the end of the 90s, you have Midnighter and Apollo, who are basically badass versions of Batman and Superman. And they were the first superheroes to get married. They actually adopted a child, and they eventually got sucked into the DC universe. And Midnighter became the first gay male superhero to have his own title at DC. He's not to everybody's taste, but there's enough people who like him to warrant his popularity. Now, as we go into the new century, things start getting a little more sophisticated and better. Things are getting better and better. So, we have a character, Terry Burke, and he was a supporting player for one of the Green Lanterns. And there was about a 2-year arc about him coming out, realizing he was gay, being rejected, because he was in love with the superhero, and the superhero was straight, and him dealing with that, falling in love, then getting for real, and then get beaten up by homophobes and put in the hospital. And that story arc actually earned 2 GLAAD Awards, two years in a row. And it was written by Judd Winnick. Judd Winnick's first claim to fame was on the 3rd season of The Real World. And he was in there with Puck and Pedro Zamora, who was one of the more prominently well-known guys. He was a guy who was suffering from AIDS and was a big activist, and he died shortly after the series premiered. And his death really, really greatly affected Judd Winnick, to the point that he changed his writing style. He actually has 3 GLAAD Awards, and one was a book about Pedro. He's created a number of gay characters, including Lightning or Thunder and Grace Choi, that you've seen a version of on Black Lightning on the TV show. And this is a nice case of, oftentimes allies impact us and help us. And this is one of those cases where we impact the ally. Now, how many have ever seen Queer as Folk? Okay, because that's where we're going next. Queer as Folk, I love Queer as Folk. You haven't seen it in a while, but they actually created this comic book character called Rage. And Queer as Folk is one of those rare shows that actually acknowledge gay geeks. One of the main characters was a gay geek. in both versions, the British version and the American version. And in the Showtime version, Michael Novotny, he was somebody who loves comics, but he eventually started his own comic book shop, and he got tired of the poor representation. So he got together with this artist, like, we're gonna create our own comic book with a gay hero, and it'll be great, and it'll be what we want. And they even actually had a printing of the sole issue as a DVD bonus if you ordered that season. It's interesting, you can find it online. Ooh, not the most commercial thing in the world. But the most interesting part is when they were conceiving him, they didn't want a gay version of Batman, or a gay version of Superman, or a gay version of Spider-Man. They wanted a superhero that felt like authentic to them what a gay man is supposed to be, or authentic to the kind of gay men they were used to seeing. And this was somebody who was strong, defiant, and unapologetically sexual. That to them was that was authentic for them. And it brings up this whole idea, of course, there's not just one kind of gay man. There's not just one kind of lesbian, one kind of trans person, or bisexual. And no one character can serve as the token of all. And that was the nice message there, like, we got one kind of gay person. That's not enough. All right. I love this next one. Another recent find. This is Zsazsa Zaturnnah. This is from a Filipino superhero. And Ado is a gay man who ended up swallowing this alien space rock. And when he did, got transformed into this gigantic Amazonian superheroine called Zsazsa Zaturnnah. And they even make jokes about it, apparently, about the fact that how can you be 6'4" and still have breasts that perfect and everything. The really interesting thing about this is, it was a huge hit in the Philippines. This is not an ongoing series, it was just like a couple of things. It won a National Book Award. It became regular subject matter for gender studies at the university. Imagine that. Serious papers. It was turned into a stage musical and a film. Yes, imagine that happening in the US. That's inconceivable at this point. And this happened 15 years ago. She was a phenomenon. So, cultural diversity. All right. We're gonna go back to Marvel homophobia. Rawhide Kid. Okay, this is a big one. Now, around that time, this is one of the rare times I'm not talking about superheroes, but they did have the effect on gay superheroes. They decided it'd be fun to do a mini-series called Slack Leather, which they took this old character called the Rawhide Kid that nobody cared about anymore, and have a little fun, do a little satire where they were saying, made him gay. And that was part of the Marvel Max line. Now, the problem was that apparently there was a lot of poor reaction to it. I have it, I've read it, I understand why. Because you naturally have conservatives outraged, like, how dare you pervert this icon character that nobody cares about anymore. But then the people in the gay community weren't so happy, because if you're gonna make him gay, make him gay. What's this wink wink about your clothes look fabulous? Like, he never kisses a man, he never has any romantic overtures. It's like, it's all innuendo. If you're gonna do it, commit to it, otherwise you're just insulting to us. And what happens is, the backlash was so great that the editor-in-chief at the time, Joe Quesada, decided, well, from now on, the mediating decision was, any gay subject matter will now have an adult label on it. When there was nothing sexual going on in this miniseries, except a little, oh, that's okay, ma'am. I don't need your kisses. Your thanks is enough. So that's a problem right there. Now, so, you see what I mean? Marvel has a little rocky road getting there. Now, Surge of Power premieres. Surge of Power, as far as I know, is the first American feature to have a gay superhero. Well, it's probably the only American feature to have a gay superhero. This premiered, it was an indie film. You can rent it. It hasn't aged well. Today, it looks like sort of a glorified fan film, except it has Lou Ferrigno and Noel Newell and minor celebrities featured in it. But, it premiered here in Austin, like I said, in 2004 at the Austin Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. Some of those are my pictures. Vincent was and by the way, Vincent was a guy who wanted to go into low-budget filmmaking. Before he did this, he was a lawyer. And he's the star, and he wrote it. Like I said, it hasn't aged well, but here's the great thing about it, is I remember they gave 2 time slots to this, and it actually had, remember I said there's not more than one type of gay? He didn't want some badass, he didn't want some ultra-violent. What he wanted his hero, Surge of Power, to be guy next door, upright, do-gooder, and Catholic. There's a couple of moments where he's actually praying to Jesus for strength. So, that was his kind of gay. And he wanted to create a family-friendly movie that kids could go see. And he succeeded because there were actually straight families that brought their kids to the performance. And the kids loved it, and the parents were grateful. And the coolest part, that's always nice when I have this long time slot and I can tell these extra stories. It's a very classic story where he's this ordinary guy, he wants to do well, he suddenly finds himself with powers, and he's trying to be a superhero, and he wants to replace this legendary hero called Omen. And Omen has long been retired, and Omen was the guardian of big city, and he says, I just want to be like Omen and take up the mantle. And he reaches a crisis point where he thinks, I'm a failure, I'm no good at this, I'm never gonna measure up. Omen appears to Surge to give him that classic pep talk. It's like, you're just on the right path, you just gotta do what you can do, don't worry about it. Omen is played by Star Trek's Nichelle Nichols. So you've got this grand revered hero who is a woman of color played by a diva. That's what I like about the movie, those little subversive touches. Okay, just as I said, Marvel sometimes gets it right, and Wiccan Hulkling was one of the many, a perfect great example. They're one of the few times they got the GLAAD Award. Marvel wasn't getting the GLAAD Award very often, and this is one of those cases. They were created as part of the Young Avengers by Alan Heinberg, who's a very talented but incredibly unreliable creator. So, they're a great couple, they've been very popular, they've got nuance. It's like, yeah, you root for them. Okay, but speaking of that, we still go back to one more time to that homophobic well with Marvel. And during around the mid-noughts, there were a couple of, a series of real goofs. One, we've got this story called, by the story arc of Arnold, who is a gay teen mutant, who went on to be pretty popular. And originally they were going to do something very after-school special and have him the subject of bullying because he was gay, bullying because he was a mutant and hideous. And originally they were going to end up killing himself and having one of his abusers regret and change his life around and learn a lesson. And the powers that be said, no, we don't want that. Which is great because in the long run it turned out great for Marvel because he turned out to be a popular character. The problem was, their reasoning wasn't because, oh no, we see, we don't want to send the wrong message about being gay, or we don't want to send out, we see a great potential of this character, keep him. No, because this is a family book and we don't want suicide. So, right outcome, wrong reasons. But around the same time, we have this issue where Northstar gets killed. And he's really wearing a hideous costume when he dies that no self-respecting gay man would wear. And he gets impaled by Wolverine. Wolverine's mind control. And by the way, around then, it's already established the trope that somebody dying isn't permanent. They can easily be brought back, which is what happens in the next issue. So, okay, what's the big deal? The problem is, during that whole month, there are multiple iterations of Northstar dying. Parallel Earth Northstar, future Northstar, any version of Northstar they can think of was killed that month. Yes, because somebody's not communicating with each other. And so, you know, when you see that, you're kind of like, why are we constantly killing him? Even if you bring him back to life, it's like, no one's gonna think about killing Spider-Man 4 times in the same month. Oh, and then one of the most embarrassed points is this minor character called Freedom Ring, which was created by Robert Kirkman, who created The Walking Dead. And Kirkman wanted to create this story where he wanted to show how hard it is to be a superhero. It's really hard. Most people are not fit to do it because it's dangerous. And that was the point, and he created this great character. He's a well-adjusted gay guy. And he always regretted, he later on learned to come to regret, I should have never made him gay. And what happened was, and this is around the time when there was still a lot of fallout about the whole thing with Slab Leather, and Joe Quesada was saying, no, don't worry, we've got great gay characters. In fact, we got this new one, Freedom Ring. He's gonna be our new primary gay character. You're gonna love him. Next month, he gets ripped to shreds and impaled. And that was the intention all along, was for this character to brutally die. It was always meant to be a mini-series to say, being a superhero is hard. That's not for everybody. And that's the reasoning, and because of the whole kill your gays kind of trope, Kirkman realized, yeah, I should have never made him gay. I should have made him straight, and then there wouldn't be a problem. And speaking of the kill your gays trope, that led to this next piece, which is book Hero. I don't know if any of you have ever read this. It was a novel written, like I said, by Perrin Moore, whose big claim to fame was producing the film versions of the Chronicles of Narnia. And he was sick and tired of gays getting beaten up, raped, murdered, etc. Basically getting refrigerated. And so he created his own book about a superhero, coming-of-age story, Tom Creed. And you know, this was written, like I said, at that time, and what's very interesting about this book, it's not a bad book. The third act is a little rough. Most of it's pretty nice, worth getting, is it really reflects the social climate of the time that it was written. Like, yes, there are people who are supportive, but it's still something like, oh no, I'm not coming out yet. I could get fired. And this was a legitimate concern that Tom has. Tom is doubly in the closet. One, he's gay, and one, he has superpowers, and his dream is to be a big superhero and apply to the superhero team, because every year they have tryouts and you get to apprentice, and it's a great job because you get fame and adoration. Well, his dad is a fictitious version of Bucky, who was ousted by the superhero team. He was scapegoated because there was a big disaster, even though his dad was the one that saved the day, and there was fallout. So he got scapegoated, and so he hates supers, and he's a bit of a homophobe, so he's like doubly in the closet. I can't tell my dad I want to be a superhero. I can't tell my dad I'm gay. But the problem is, in the story, there's a point where he has to make the decision to come out on live international television, because somebody is killing superheroes, and the superhero team gets the wrong person. He knows it because he's his alibi. And he has to go on camera. And he knows if he goes on camera and says, that guy was with me that night, he's gonna get fired. And they'll come up with some excuse to say, and sure enough, they fire him, and they say, well, things aren't working out. You're not quite matching up to the level. And eventually the story ends where he ends up saving the day, and they ask him back, and he says, maybe. All right, I'm gonna speed things up a bit. This is a little French short about the incredible adventures of Fusion Man. It was done specifically to battle homophobia. It's very cute. It's basically this very studly superhero who's gay, knows plenty of other gay superheroes. He outs himself in an interview to say, because they ask him, is there anybody special you're involved with? Yes, I'm going home to dinner with him tonight. And plus the guy's Korean. And this is just to show, just an example, we're getting lots and lots of gay characters, lots of couples, lots of variations. To keep it fun. Now, in 2011, we've got this film called Madam X, which unfortunately is really hard to find in this country. But if you do, it's fun. Anime fans will enjoy this. Basically, classic superhero tropes, coming of age, except Madam X has a fabulous supply of internet weapons. The character Adam, he finds out that he's destined to take the mantle of Madam X. At first doesn't want to, but what's great is the story of empowerment, where in the beginning, I just want to hide from my life. I want to hide from the haters, the people who are going to kill me. By the end, Adam fully embraces not only the trans identity or the expression. There's a scene at the end where she's out and about on the street in basically a glorified elite outfit, and there are little kids screaming all sorts of homophobic slurs. Don't even faze her. I'm above that. I'm too strong for you. Whatever. I'm not even gonna give you any attention. And so it's pretty cool. All right, and further in 2011, I'm just gonna dip a little bit in the anime pool because Fire Emblem does fit my category of superhero. And what's interesting is that you do have the stereotype where he is a very squishy queen, but he's also a rich, independent queen that he don't have to rely on sponsors because he's his own sponsor. So, now, but speaking of playing with the stereotypes, that same year on Pride Day 2011, they came up with this gay app called Super Gay, which this guy who was closeted gets transformed into a superhero. You have all the very standard types of game situations, and then you get plot. He falls in love with a reporter. He has to fight clones, evil clones of his ex-girlfriend because she and her dad turned out to be diabolical villains. And graphics are nice, and from what I understand from reading the reviews, it's a decent game. My phone is not compatible with the game system. Oh, and it was made in Barcelona. Yes. All right, Batwoman premieres in September 2011. First LGBT lead in a mainstream comic book. And of course, we have the same problem that Rawhide Kid did because the conservatives say, how dare, because when she was first introduced 60 years ago, she was a beard. She was there to make sure people weren't thinking Batman was gay. And so when they're making her a lesbian now, and the conservatives say, how dare you pervert about this character that nobody remembers? Even though she's not the same character. And of course, they're Ruby Rose is working on a pilot as we speak. Now, in 2012, there was this online comic called Young Protectors, which had several queer characters. And it's one that I like, and the only reason I bring it up, Young Protectors, because in the online world, there are alternatives to Marvel and DC. There are a lot of gay-friendly, gay-specific superheroes, queer superheroes, where if you're sick and tired of waiting, there are other options. I mean, a lot of these are dependent on Patreon. Alex's one is lucky, it appears, the pages appear twice a week, but he's popular enough and he gets enough money to be able to pay for the costs. But yes, you got options. All right, so, big event, 2012, Northstar gets married, and Marvel lets everybody know that. There's plenty of barrage, and this brings up this whole issue. This is not a homophobic issue, but this is bringing in where we're at the point where gay content is popular enough to say, ooh, we can make money off of this. And so something like this is an example of, is this really progress? Or is it, you want my money? And this was this landmark issue, everybody talking about it. DragonCon, I knew a bunch of people who just cosplayed this whole thing and did a photo shoot of it. It was great, except it was incredibly marketed for months. This is happening, it's happening. Yeah, that's great, except the reality is Northstar was never an A-list character. And of course, this is happening when during the election year in 2012, marriage equality is like the biggest thing going on issue-wise for the gays. So of course they can play this up. And one of the things that Marvel's marketing machine is very good at, it's very good at kind of fooling you, although not actually lying. Because, as I said earlier, they kind of phrase things to let people think this was the first gay superhero marriage. It wasn't. Apollo Midnighter was like 10 years earlier, or almost 10 years earlier. They were even like the second gay comic book marriage because a month earlier, they're beaten up by Kevin Keller of the Archies. The Archies beat you to the altar, the gay altar, guys. What does that say? Now, in fairness, DC is a little guilty of it as well. This is a character, this is a Green Lantern. And this is Catman. This is a character that Gail Simone, who is Gay Geek's best friend. Catman was a character that she very slowly was getting the picture that he's not so straight as you think. He's not afraid he has an attraction to some men apparently. But it was subtle and natural and organic, and if the title hadn't been canceled, it would have come to fruition in a few more issues. What happens around 2012, there was this headline being passed around on the media. DC Comics to make Green Lantern gay. You see that headline, what? Hal Jordan's gonna be gay? Or is it this one, or is it John Stewart? What they did was, they were creating a new Green Lantern from an alternate Earth that happened to be gay. And they created all this hype. And it's like, guys, I don't care how good this book will be, just be honest with us, okay? Don't try to, clickbait. We don't want clickbait. That's not the way that's gonna have us on. Now, all right, I'm gonna get through the next 10 minutes on this. As we move on forward, waiting for Hollywood. Okay, a little bit of somberness. This is a real quote. This is not a fun thing to read. This is an actual blogger and so-called journalist, when his reaction, when he found out they're making Green Lantern gay. So, he doesn't kind of understand, you wanting us to be invisible is just as bad as you wanting us to beat us up? Now, and around this time, Marvel and DC starts making a little more push for diversity, and by default, we get more LGBT characters. However, we get 2 steps forward, and then we get a little regression back, and some of those progress disappear. And these are examples of some of the characters that were changed and acknowledged. And here's the only thing I want to say about this attempt is, and there was a few years ago where they said, some female writer says, we're making Catwoman bisexual and it's gonna be canon. Don't worry, guys, and I want to say, there's no such thing as canon anymore. They brought back Bucky back from the dead, and that was considered sacred myth. And last year she was supposed to get married to Batman. It didn't matter if she was bisexual. And because there's no such thing as canon, it would take an easy snap of the fingers to make dreamy bisexual teenage Loki evil scumbag Loki all over again. And so, again, this is part of that kind of growing phase where let's be a little more honest, because, don't lie to us. Please don't lie to us. Now, in the meantime, there's a lot of fun, good, or at least well-regarded trans characters. We have Alicia Yao, who was a major supporting character for Batgirl, first trans woman to get married in the comics, or at least in the mainstream comics. And we had Porcelain, who was this villainess. She could, depending on what her mood was, she would go from male to female. it just depended what kind of move she is. And no one was really sure what was the original biological sex, and after a while, it doesn't matter. You have Sera, who is this trans woman who was a sidekick to Thor's sister Angela. And Angela was, shall we say, she was the typical warrior, very powerful, no sense of humor. Sera has magical abilities and is the smart one. You got Koi Boy, who's sidekick to the sensational Squirrel Girl. And a couple years back, you had the character Chalice, was an actual full-out trans superhero. So it's very nice. You got all these. That's what's nice over the years, that the representation has been stretching out. And the quality of this, I will leave to trans community to comment on, because I don't think I'm in the right position. I'm in a position to qualify how good they are. Now, remember I said about Archies? And Kevin Keller? Kevin Keller was actually having his own title before Marvel or DC put out one for a gay male character. And around issue 14, he became a superhero. Again, he got beaten up by Archie. What does that say? All right, now, things are starting to change in the last few years, where when I started out this panel 4 years ago, it came to a time where wondering if we'll ever get the proper movie representation. And then it's now changing to, it's going to be a matter of when we're going to get that proper movie representation. And now it's a question of waiting, when are we going to get the right movie representation? And one of the things that's changing is how people are viewing the definition of heroes. And there's been books and whatnot out. And one is Stripling Warrior. This is a queer team of heroes. They're Mormons. They are Mormons. It's not a bad book. It's a little compressed because there was only so much money in the Kickstarter campaign. So you had like about 10 issues of stories compressed into 4 issues. But it's a pretty brave idea. And by the way, the 2 main characters are active Mormons. There also happen to be a gay man and a lesbian woman. And the whole saying is that God don't play no favorites. They're just looking for someone who will be a good avatar to mete out justice. There's a book that came out a couple years ago called Sacred Band. That it's very kind of X-Men-like. It's a good read. It was written by a game designer, so he understands action very well. But he also plays something that I noticed that a lot of writers in the queer representation haven't been very good at. It's about role models, about the importance of role models, how we all need them, people in our community. The fact that it's great that you have like a gay or lesbian trans superhero, but you also say, even the gay, trans, lesbian superheroes need inspiration, need guidance. Like one of the characters is trans, she's freaking out about having to be a superhero. She doesn't want it, like, there's nobody, who do I model myself for? And then she panics, oh my God, I have to be the role model. It has to start with me. What the hell am I doing? And those are the sort of things, and the fact that you have this gay superhero, very much a gay Superman, who learns, even after he retired, after he was outed, he really had impact on people. That his goodness, his self-sacrifice transcended his sexual identity, even in very conservative minds. And I know recently is this series called Dreadnought, and this is a trans superhero, teenage trans superhero. I haven't read it, but I've heard some nice things about it. Now, a couple years back in Germany, there was a museum display in which basically you had superhero art with a queer bent, queer themes playing on it. And I bring this up because you actually have somebody professing queer superhero art queer superheroes have artistic value. And then we got the work of Greg Berlanti, basically the Arrowverse. These are amongst the many examples. L, G, B, and the T. I would have added the latest the Nia Nal in her costume, but there wasn't a good picture yet of her because she hasn't gone full blown yet. That's not until next month. And you even have an animated character, first time, an cartoon character who's a gay hero. This is cool. This happens, and notice racial diversity. This happens because Greg Berlanti is a gay man with influence and respect. Before he was doing superhero movies, he was doing very high quality, high respected dramatic shows. And really capping off is that a year and a half ago, when they had one of their crossover shows, there was this moment here where you've got Citizen Cold and the Ray kissing. You've got two openly gay heroes played by two openly gay actors kissing multiple times as an affirmation of their love. And this is one of those situations where I didn't know I needed this until I saw it. And there were lots of gay geeks going, oh yes, yes, yes. And on the flip side, it was the two lesbians that were getting the booty call and having the wedding sex. Just to be fair, balance. Now, the other thing that's changing is that a couple years back, one of the writers for Wonder Woman said, qualified her as queer. Some people keep saying, oh, she's bisexual. No, she's queer because she comes from a country where there's only one gender, all women. You adapt. You adapt. And they played on these themes, people before them, George Perez, Gail Simone, the original creator, Charles Moulton, all played with the sexuality ideas to some extent. So, and here's Greg Rucka, probably comfortable enough to say, official, yeah, we're making it official. She's not heteronormative. That's what he really means when she's queer. And of course, we get here at the point where Marvel starts really changing because they came out with this very daring story which they made Iceman gay. Made lots of headlines, much to the chagrin of Bendis, Michael Bendis. He didn't want all the attention. But it did lead to, for about 2017, a book with Iceman, a gay superhero, his own series written by a gay writer. And you also have America Chavez, a queer Latina, being written by a queer Latina. And by the way, these are niche books. When you write a new title, any new title, unless they've got like Batman or the Avengers or X-Men, they're gonna be long shots. But to do such a niche title, but willing to invest in it and actually hoping to try to get authentic writing, that shows real growth. That's why this is not about money. They knew going in that it'd be a long shot, that this would be a financially successful book, but it was serving a need. Even though both of them got canceled after a year, they made a mini as a follow-up for the Iceman. Now the other thing, and that shows how things are changing, because at least if they're changing in those attitudes in the books, that helps contribute to the changes in the movies. And speaking of the changes in the movies, there's also people we're asking for. This was a big meme right here. And on the right, that's a little clip from a trailer, a gay superhero trailer that somebody from England decided to make. That it's viable, you can have a gay superhero. Ironically, it's Iceman. And then recently, we got drag queen superheroes over the last year and a half coming out. We had like Kick-Ass Drag Queen, and that was about a year and a half ago, from Bob the Drag Queen, who won RuPaul's Drag Race a couple years ago, created this character on Instagram. You've got recently on Netflix Super Drags, which is, they said, only for adults, 18 over, not for children. And then recently, of course, Marvel came out with a drag queen superhero of their own. It's part of the X-Men. Now, this was a little fun. This is the Phantom, very famous long-running character. And they actually published a version of the fandom in Sweden, and they actually had the fandom attending a Pride celebration in Warsaw. And then you got homophobes getting all worked up and started attacking the parade marchers. And you have the fandom interceding, picking up a pride flag and whacking down the homophobes to keep them in blind. And well, the Polish medium really went apeshit over this. They said, this is disgusting. You're showing us as we're bigots. We're not that. That's not how Polish people are. Even though Poland is one of the most homophobic countries in Eastern Europe. And to prove the irony is, Captain Sweden, the actual announcer said, if they want a superhero so badly, they should have gotten Captain Sweden. If you look up Captain Sweden, that was not a compliment. Captain Sweden is a derogatory figure created to mock Swedish social values and politics. And they're often shown as in drag, sexually perverted, so here you are telling that we're not bigoted, and then they make this incredibly bigoted remark. Now, as we further on, at least in one version of the DC game universe, Harley and Ivy are married. And this last thing I'm getting to really shows how things are changing. This is a work in progress superhero rock opera. Set in the 1960s, it's being made in San Francisco. Adrian Price is the one with the fiddle. The main character is trans, and she comes to the Tenderloin neighborhood in the 1960s, meets other trans people who are superheroes, and they teach her, the goal is to teach her to find her power and agency. So, isn't that wild? A trans superhero rock opera that's in progress right now. And I've heard some of the preliminary music and it's not too bad. It's got promise. You ever think, like, even just a superhero rock opera to begin with, but trans? Now, going back to that whole issue about the movies, and I'm gonna really pick this up. Problem is, again, we've got issues about representation. And you got like the first claim to a film dealing with a queer character was in the Power Rangers reboot. Except, one, that's kind of a safe choice because they always try to, this underlying, they're trying to promote, we're a diverse group, we've got different ethnicities, different colors, and plus they never say the word lesbian or gay. Then you got the fact, we got the Eraser, Marvel, you were making such good progress. But this is the film division where all the lesbian scenes or bisexual scenes in Thor Ragnarok and the Black Panther, almost done. Snip, gone. Cutting room floor. Deadpool, yes, Deadpool, hey, Deadpool, we've got a lesbian couple, hooray! Except, it doesn't fully pass the Vita Russo test. The Vita Russo test is like the Alison Bechdel test, only for queer characters. It only covers 2 out of the 3. And that's 1, the queer character is explicitly identified. Check. 2, the characters are defined by more than their sexual identity. Check. 3, if you take the character out of the movie, it compromises the plot. No. Almost there. And by the way, the character Shatterstar, played by Louis Tan, he's supposed to be bisexual, but he gets before you even have a chance to address it. Now, as we get on, we're seeing these little moments of maybe we're getting real progress with the movie, maybe we're just hearing BS, PR BS. First thing is Kevin Feige saying, we're gonna have at least 2 characters, gay characters, finally in a Marvel movie. Hooray, except no names, no timeline, which means, basically means, we haven't figured out a way to introduce them without pissing off China and Russia. And without sacrificing $200 million in profit. Now, you've got the character of Renee Montoya in the new Birds of Prey movie, which is that Harley Quinn plus, etc. Now, in the comics, she's a lesbian who eventually becomes a vigilante superhero. And she's being played by Rosie Perez, so I don't know how much superheroing she's gonna be doing, but she still may be a lesbian. And then you've got the recent news about Lee Daniels, wanting to create his own superhero, gay superhero called Super Bitch, based on this guy's Instagram photo where he actually could do his own stunt in high heels. And if you actually Google that, you can see the film. And this is me done. I was a little late. And this is just the final image of lots of DC and Marvel LGBT heroes drawn by Luciano Vecchio. Sorry for keeping you going. Thank you all.